Yevgeny Prigozhin. Russia's Federal Security Service has now said it will drop the case against Wagner. Earlier, these men had been labelled as traitors by Russian President Vladimir Putin. In an event that sent shockwaves through Russia and the world, Wagner fighters, led by Prigozhin, a close ally of Putin till not long ago, staged an attempted rebellion on Saturday. One that clearly threatened President Vladimir Putin's grip on power and posed the greatest challenge to the Russian president's 25-year reign. Hours later, Prigozhin halted his march on Moscow and said he did not want to spill Russian blood and was therefore retreating. Today's statement, issued by the Russian government, does not mention the Wagner boss by name. The group has been asked to hand over its heavy military equipment to the Russian military. Prigozhin claims the mutiny was not an attempt to overthrow Putin, but a protest against the Russian government's plans to shut down his mercenary group. He also claims that his troops' uprising was a masterclass in how the Ukraine invasion should have been and demonstrated major flaws in Russia's battle plan as far as Ukraine is concerned. Reports say the Wagner chief is now in Belarus. Remember, it was the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko who brokered peace and got Prigozhin to end his mutiny. But while the rebellion may have been quelled, most observers believe it has left the Russian president significantly weaker and diminished. Hoping to scotch such commentary, the Kremlin has issued a statement claiming Vladimir Putin's position is unshaken. There is a lot of unnecessary hysteria on this issue from pseudo-specialists. The Kremlin also claims it has no information on the whereabouts of Yevgeny Prigozhin. Under the terms of the deal that ended the mutiny, Prigozhin was to be allowed to move to Belarus, and his fighters were given the chance to either join Russia's regular armed forces or move to Belarus. Predictably, Putin has insinuated that the West was behind the armed insurrection, saying the West wants Russians to kill each other. US President Joe Biden has issued a denial, saying the US and NATO had nothing to do with it. The question we're asking is this: where does Prigozhin's mutiny leave Putin? He may have succeeded in quelling the rebellion, but it has seriously dented his image of a strong man both at home and abroad. Hasn't the Russian president's authority been significantly diminished? Will the Wagner revolt impact the Ukraine war? After all, the Wagner Group fought by the side of the Russian military for a long time in Ukraine and was even instrumental in the fall of Bakhmut. Additionally, their mutiny has exposed many vulnerabilities in Russia's security and military forces. How does the West view these developments? Are Ukraine and the West in a position to exploit the chink in Putin's armor? Is Vladimir Putin a much weaker leader today, or will he manage to bounce back and once again stamp his undisputed authority on Russia? To answer some of those questions, we are now joined by Ambassador Prabhat Prakash Shukla, former Indian ambassador to Russia. So thank you very much for joining us. We will be coming to you in just a moment, but before that, we want to play out for our viewers some reactions that have come into this developing Russia story.
Вы защитили конституционный строй, жизнь, безопасность и свободу наших граждан. Уберегли нашу Родину от потрясений. Фактически остановили гражданскую войну. В непростой ситуации вы действовали четко, слаженно, делом доказали свою верность народу России и воинской присяге. Проявили ответственность за судьбу Родины и ее будущее.
Была проделана огромная работа целым рядом лиц. И еще раз повторяю, была проявлена воля президента к тому, чтобы не допустить развития событий по худшему сценарию. Договоренности реализуются. Вы знаете, что президент России, касается это международных дел, касается это внутренних дел, он всегда выполняет свое слово. И если им слово дано, оно выполняется. Конечно, всем хотелось бы надеяться, чтобы слова, данные со всех сторон, выполнялись беспрекословно.
From the very beginning of the events, on my direct order, steps were taken to avoid a big bloodshed. This took time, including to give those who made a mistake a chance to think again, to understand that their actions are strongly rejected by society, and to what tragic, destructive consequences for Russia, for our state, the adventure in which they were dragged lead. It was precisely this outcome, a fratricide, that the enemies of Russia wanted. The neo-Nazis in Kiev and their Western patrons and all sorts of nationalist traitors. They wanted Russian soldiers to kill each other so that servicemen and civilians would die, so that in the end Russia would lose and a society would split, choke in bloody civil strife.
All right, let's now go across to Ambassador Prabhat Prakash Shukla, former Indian ambassador to Russia, to understand the ramifications of the developments that unfolded in that country over the weekend. Ambassador Shukla, the biggest question before us at the moment is this: where does this mutiny leave President Putin? There are many who believe that while he may have succeeded in quelling the rebellion, fact of the matter is that he looks significantly weaker and diminished in the aftermath of this mutiny. He was comprehensively outmaneuvered by the Wagner boss, Yevgeny Prigozhin. For a full day, he looked like he was simply not in control of his country, and there seemed to be anarchy. Where do you think Putin goes from here?
Well, let me just clarify that I was ambassador in Moscow, and I have also been the ambassador to Ukraine. So I guess I get a slightly different perspective on these things. Where is President Putin now as a result? Look, one thing I have learned over the last 2 decades is never to underestimate Putin's ability to bounce back. Truly, he has never faced a challenge of this nature. Sorry, but it's too early to say that this has definitively weakened him. What it has certainly done is to expose divisions at the very top of the Russian leadership. For my money, I am firstly a little surprised that the FSB, for example, did not see this coming. Or if they saw it coming, they perhaps did not inform President Putin. Whichever way you want to chop it, it is surprising that they were unable to see this coming and maybe take preventive action preemptively in advance. Now, the other thing which some newspapers in Russia are reporting is also this, that actually when Prigozhin entered Rostov, his actual intention was to meet Shoigu and Gerasimov, respectively the defense minister and the chief of general staff, who were there. But they did not apparently wait for him, and they flew off to Moscow. And according to these newspaper reports, they gave a false report to President Putin, who then declared that this was a mutiny and drew the parallel, which frankly surprised me too, to 1917. Now, it's worth pausing a while to think about what President Putin was thinking when he mentioned 1917. See, 2 things happened. One of them which Putin confronted in his own remarks, which was that the state system was overthrown and that he would not permit that to happen. Okay, he seems to have achieved that. But as a kind of precursor to the overthrow of the state system in February 1917, old style, March 1917, new style, as Lenin put it afterwards, the soldiers voted with their feet the soldiers deserted en masse. Now, of course, nobody is addressing this point, but it is a very important one because the war has not been going very well for Russia. And really, the effective fighting has been done by two non-regular forces. We talk about Wagner, and they have done a pretty good job of fighting for places like Artyomsk, which in India is called Bakhmut. And the other is the Chechens. And it struck me that this time the Chechens spoke very strongly in favor of President Putin and were actually heading to Rostov to confront the Wagner Group. One other point that is worth noting is that Prigozhin was welcomed in Rostov, not only by the civilian population, but even by the military forces there.
There was zero resistance.
Zero resistance. And in fact, they not only waltzed into the supreme headquarters in Rostov, but they also came to within 200 kilometers of Moscow without any significant opposition from the ground forces. Yes, there were some attacks from the Air Force, and the Wagner forces killed 12 pilots. This President Putin has admitted. So, it exposes some very concerning dissensions within what are called the Siloviki. And in fact, if you read today's Pravda report, now this is not the old Pravda, of course, they're not a party organ, but they have very close links with the ruling party. And they have painted a very bleak picture of how the meeting went between President Putin and the Siloviki. I hope your audience knows what the Siloviki are. They are basically the law enforcement and the coercive authority of the government. So Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Interior, the Special Services, and so on. They are called the Siloviki. And according to some newspaper reports from Russia, the meeting was a fairly tough one, and Putin did some plain speaking. And there is anticipation that some heads will have to roll within the top echelons of the Russian Siloviki and military leadership.
This is very interesting indeed. Now, sir, let's just for a moment look at it from the Western perspective. I want to quote to you one British security analyst who tweeted, "Western intelligence agencies are warning that Putin has been mortally wounded by Prigozhin's aborted coup. NATO must prepare for the collapse of Russia. While it's difficult to predict the timing, civil war now seems inevitable, and that will be followed by a humanitarian catastrophe." The gentleman then goes on to say, there are different factions vying for control of Russia's nuclear stockpiles, and that might force the West to deploy ground forces to stabilize the region and prevent the wrongs to WMDs. Firstly, does this sound too extreme to you? Secondly, how do you think the West is viewing these developments? Are Ukraine and the West in a position to exploit the chink in Putin's armor, which seems to have been exposed following this mutiny?
Yeah, sorry. So point one, yes, I think this is a very lurid description of what might happen in Russia. It's always difficult to discount something entirely. After all, we have seen the collapse of the Soviet Union, and I was one of the very few who saw that coming. At the moment, I don't see a collapse of Russia. So I think the rest of it about, nuclear weapons and loose nukes having to be controlled and so on, no, I really don't see that happening. Worst case scenario, even if there is a change, I think it will be a managed change, number one. Number two, it's important to remember that President Putin is going to face re-election next March 2024. And so, he is going to do his utmost to stabilize the situation so that he can win another term. And at present, there is certainly no challenger to him, although the way Prigozhin has positioned himself, it's not to be ruled out that he could have a shy at it. But of course, there are a lot of legal hurdles before any viable challenger can come up to stand against Putin. This is what I would say as far as the, this very lurid prognosis is concerned. And remember, there are, in fact, I'm glad you brought this up. There are other foreign forces which are very actively, I wouldn't say involved, but they are certainly very close to Putin and are watching it. First and foremost, the leadership of the People's Republic of China. President Xi Jinping was in Moscow in March, and I think they have made some fairly strong commitments to a moment of truth for the Russian army. Because I think at the moment, especially when we are talking about Donetsk, the fighting is now entirely in the hands of the Russian army. I expect that there will be some very serious probing attacks. And for two reasons, I expect a strong Russian response. One, of course, because they can't afford to lose territory. They've already lost something like 7 or 8 villages. But if it becomes a situation where larger tracts of territory are threatened, I think the Russians will have to react very strongly, number one. But number two, also because as part of reasserting his leadership, President Putin, I believe, is going to escalate the fighting anyway. And, up to now, they have been a little restrained because they want to retain the option of maintaining their commitments in other parts of the world, of which there are many, starting with West Asia, which is vital for Russia. I think at this stage, should there be a serious threat to the Russian military position, I think they will bring in many, many more aspects of their military power. First and foremost, I would say the Air Force, which has proven its loyalty to President Putin, and some of the short-range missiles that they have. And they have a fairly large number. Not all of them will be neutralized by the anti-missile defenses which the Ukrainians have used up to now. So I expect to see an escalation of the fighting in the coming weeks and months.
Okay, couple of things here. It's interesting you brought up the Russia-China relationship. We've seen, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin in the past talk about a limitless partnership. The Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, I'd like to share this with our viewers, sir. The Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Andrei Rudenko, was in Beijing this Sunday, a day after that aborted coup. That surely tells us something. Now coming back to the Ukraine war and the potential impact that the developments of this weekend could have on the war, you believe there is going to be a significant escalation, that Vladimir Putin is going to double down and launch fresh offenses against Ukraine. But, there are those who say that the exit of the Wagner mercenary group itself is going to significantly impact the Russian military, because for the longest time this group fought by the side of the Russian forces in Ukraine. We know that they were instrumental in the fall of Bakhmut. It's another matter that, the Russian Defense Ministry had decided to absorb all these mercenary groups in the Russian army and to sort of shut them down by the 1st of July, which was one of the triggers for this mutiny. The other factor being that this uprising has exposed many vulnerabilities in Russia's military forces as well as its battle plan in Ukraine. At least that's what Prigozhin would have us believe. So, to that extent, what kind of an impact are these developments likely to have on Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine?
Right. First things first. I regret to say I'm in a minority who believe that the Chinese commitment to Russia is very strong. Frankly, over the weekend, the PRC has not really shown its hand, and some of the Russian media, Russian language media, have noted this, that in contrast to the positions taken by Lukashenko and by Erdogan, that compared to these two, the position taken by Xi Jinping was rather muted. But I think they haven't shown their hand, and that's a tactical position. I believe that, in fact, their commitment to Russia is quite strong, and the reason is that they know that if Russia is humiliated in Ukraine, it will mean, the American unipolar moment all over again, and that the next target of the American diplomacy and strategy is going to be the PRC itself. So in a way, it is becoming a proxy situation with China backing Russia very strongly, and the Americans and less willingly NATO backing Ukraine. So I think, firstly, apart from what is happening on the ground, and I'll come to that in a minute, I believe there will be the telephone lines being burnt right round the clock right now to suggest to each other that, we need to de-escalate. I don't know how successful that will be, because one of the things that struck me as I was reading the joint statement issued by our Prime Minister and President Biden during our Prime Minister's recent visit, in the paragraph on Ukraine, there is absolutely no reference to diplomacy or dialogue or a peaceful settlement. So I don't know how successful any kind of backroom dealings will be. I think this will be decided on the battlefield. And you're right, there have been weaknesses exposed. Actually, frankly, starting from February 2022 itself, we have seen a subpar performance. And I've frequently made the point that the Russian forces perform like lions when they're defending their country, but they don't perform so well when they are operating abroad. You can take this back to the war with Poland in 1921, when Marshal Pilsudski defeated Timoshenko, and bring it down all the way to Afghanistan and even Chechnya. They haven't performed all that well. So there is this dichotomy in the way the Russians behave. And I think Prigozhin made a valid point when he said that the way he was greeted in Rostov is the way the Russian army ought to have been welcomed in Donetsk and Lugansk, but was not. So there is this issue before the Russian army, but I think, as I said, the ground forces have not performed particularly well, but they can hold their own. And I think it'll be the air assets that will come into play in a bigger way going forward. And I think that is the kind of escalation that I am expecting to see in the coming weeks and months.
All right, so this war is all set to escalate. Of course, Ukraine was hoping that they might be able to take advantage of this situation. I'm not sure if that's happened so far, but I'm very curious, sir. I really want to ask you this. It still remains unclear what Prigozhin was trying to achieve. Has he gained anything from this? What really was his game plan? There are many who will remind us that Putin is not known to tolerate opponents. Most of the opposition leaders are in jail. He's not even known to let his enemies live peacefully in exile. Therefore, there are many who are asking, is Prigozhin a dead man walking today?
Frankly, I would rather not go there, but I do agree with the point you are making. In fact, Putin himself has said that he can forgive a lot, but he can't forgive betrayal. And this is betrayal in spades. So yeah, there certainly is something to look out for. And I think if indeed Prigozhin has gone to Belarus, he would not be safe yet. I expect that, look, there are two things he can do. One is he can surround himself with very tight security and so on and be ready to fight, because he has shown one thing, that he is popular in Russia. And that may encourage him to stand his ground and fight in some form or the other. I also think that at some level, he will find sympathy in the West now. I think as far as the West is concerned, anyone who is willing to confront Putin will have their sympathy and maybe active support. So I think he is smart enough to know what the dangers are. And I imagine that he would take adequate precaution. So, dead man walking.
I know a diplomat would not want to give a straight answer to that question. I completely understand. But I'm a journalist, so I can go there.
I'm a very bad diplomat. I always speak my mind. But, look, I want to say one thing about the fighting. In the final analysis, the Russians can afford to lose some territory in Donetsk, but not anywhere else, I don't think. Particularly, you see, actually going back to February 2022, I think the mistake that Putin made, and it was very uncharacteristic of him, because he's normally very cool and rational. I've watched him for over 20 years. I first met him in 1999 when he was transiting through Delhi airport at 4 a.m. He's always very cool and rational and in command of the facts. In February 2022, the speech that he made was very emotional and angry. And I think he therefore went too far in his military ambition. Remember, he began by saying, I'm going to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine. That was a bridge too far.
Okay.
His real interest was in getting a land bridge to Crimea. This whole fight is over Crimea, and Crimea as the mistress of the Black Sea. That's what it's all about. And I think, therefore, a little bit of territorial loss here or there, they can put up with. But the land link to Crimea, and especially this little town called Mariupol, is critical for the military operation. And for that, I believe they will use every weapon that they have. And if they are in danger of losing Crimea, I would not even rule out the use of nuclear weapons.
Good Lord. That is quite a frightening prognosis that you've given us. But then we cannot ignore the fact that, this is a man, Vladimir Putin, who has actually sort of dangled the nuclear threat before the West on multiple occasions, saying all means are at our disposal. Nothing can be ruled out. And this is an autocrat that we are talking about. Before we let you go, sir, coming back to Prigozhin for a moment, if you could just enter the man's mind for us, because I remain curious still. What was his game plan according to you? What was he trying to achieve? This man was one of the closest allies of President Putin till not long ago, also known as Putin's chef for the longest time. What led to this? Why? Why do you think he did what he did?
Okay. I told you I'm not a good diplomat, so I'm going to speak my mind.
Please do.
Look, I think over the fact that the fighting initially was not going well, there were these frictions between Prigozhin and Shoigu/Gerasimov. They were bubbling under the surface from about September, October last year. And I think his hope, that is Prigozhin's hope, was that he had enough assets with Putin personally and in the Kremlin, which he does, by the way, still does, and that with that he could bring about the removal of Shoigu from the post of Ministry of Defense. By the way, the Chechens also have a very low opinion of the way Shoigu and Gerasimov are performing. So I think, and I don't know if this is widely known, and I don't frankly know even if it's true, but you know, Putin's press officer, Dmitry Peskov, has been with him since his days in Petersburg from about the early 1990s. His son is said to be a senior officer in the Wagner Group.
Okay.
So, yeah, so, you know, they have,
Wow.
It's been, yeah, I know very few people have come across this. As I said, I don't know if it's true. This is in the Russian media. And therefore, he may well have considered his chances as fair to bright, that if he did take a firm stand, he could achieve the outcome that he wanted. Now, the problem with that is that, you know, you can't force a leader to appear to cave under pressure.
And this move may well have backfired on Prigozhin, because now he is Putin's enemy number one. I think we can all be very clear about that.
Yes, yes, I do believe that. I do believe that, yes. Although there are some who believe that the whole thing is a put up
fixed match
and fixed put up show.
Well, that thought has crossed my mind. I'll confess.
Money has been changing hands.
Okay.
So there are all sorts of rumors always, but I agree with you. I think this is the genuine enmity that has begun, and it's hard to predict how it will end.
Hard to predict how it will end, but I must say it's really refreshing to talk to a not so diplomatic diplomat. Ambassador Prabhat Prakash Shukla, lovely to have your perspective, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
All right, on that note, let's go across to our other guests. I'm now joined by Lieutenant General Shankar Prasad, former Director General of Infantry in the Indian Army, and Wing Commander Praful Bakshi, former Chief Spokesperson for India's Defence Ministry. Lieutenant General Shankar Prasad, what happened? The biggest question before us today is simply this, sir. Where does this mutiny leave President Putin? Yes, he's managed to quell the rebellion. Prigozhin may have fled to Belarus. But fact of the matter is that most see this as the biggest challenge to Putin in his 25-year reign. Not to mention an embarrassment or perhaps a humiliation both at home and internationally. What do you think this really means for Putin?
Absolutely correct. It's a big blow to Putin's authority. Not really a blow onto his authority, but also a blow on his KGB, the intelligence organization, and the entire machinery that he commands today. Let us look at, I've been hearing what the Ambassador Shukla was saying, and most of it I agree with him. I don't want to repeat what he said, except one little point which I'll come in the end about the nuclear aspect. But what must be, you see, look at the whole thing in totality now. What has been the state of affairs of this entire operation over the last 15 months? And that will lead us to some of the answers as to why what has happened has happened. When an operation in the current world, this is not the First World War era, this is not the Second World War era. This is the era of modern times, the connectivity in the world, the modernization, the technological development, the kind of facilities human beings have today have vastly changed from what they were in the Second World War. So today you cannot have prolonged war of 15 months where the entire population has been uprooted. People are getting killed for the last 15 months, both sides. So one of the biggest mistakes President Putin made to start with is to violate the principles of war. The principles of war say you must have an aim and you must put full might to achieve that aim and objective, which I'm afraid President Putin did not do for reasons best known to him, but perhaps he did not want to cause massive destruction as would have happened if he had used massive firepower and massive forces. So that is one big mistake he made. The second, there has been a poor assessment, a poor analysis, a poor result of his intelligence. That has let him down terribly, not from the start of the war till even yesterday, the day before yesterday, when he couldn't see what is brewing inside the Wagner army. That's the second big failure, and I think the KGB will have to answer it. The third big important thing is this, which is now the answering to your question, that has it made Putin any weaker? Yes, in some ways, yes. But in some ways, it's going to make him more aggressive. In some ways, I think that what he's been restraining till now, he will unleash. He will be pricked badly now. He thinks that everybody in the world is going to laugh at him and say, oh, Putin was a great guy, but Putin is no longer, he's like a mouse now. Wagner was going to overthrow him. Now, first point first. What happened to the Wagners? You asked this question to Ambassador Shukla and he answered it, that there were many reasons. But one of the reasons which I wanted to add of what he said was there has been a battle fatigue. Now, battle fatigue of the Wagners is more important and more realism than what it is to the regular army. The Wagners have poor logistics, comparatively poorer logistic support, comparatively poor pay and allowances, comparatively other facilities that a regular army gets. Therefore, there was a tremendous amount of fatigue that has set in over the last 15 months, even though they had captured Bakhmut after great sacrifices, which is a great military action they've done. So that is what the bigger mind, in the minds of the soldiers of Wagner, and therefore the leader thought that he can catch on it and put pressure. So he wanted to put pressure on the military hierarchy and the Ministry of Defense in Russia, which he thought Putin will succumb to and do whatever he wanted to do to bring them down or to change them or whatever, or admonish them, which did not happen. And it cannot happen so easily also because in the middle of the war, you don't go on changing your finance ministers, your defense ministers and your army chiefs and the field commander, even though some field commanders were removed for inefficiency and for poor performance during the war. So having looked at all of this, now what is going to happen to the leader of Wagner? What is the future of Wagner? Let's look at that first. What is going to happen to the leader? He has annoyed Putin. He has annoyed Putin no end. Putin is not the guy who's going to spare him. You have last seen him on Sunday or a Monday. I do not know when you will ever see him again.
In fact, I asked the ambassador this question. Is he a dead man walking? President Putin is not known to tolerate opponents. He's certainly not known to forgive his enemies. And this man is today his enemy number one.
That's exactly what I'm saying. The last picture of him you saw was an SUV waving out.
Yeah.
That will perhaps be the last picture you ever seen. Please keep it framed in your channel. You will never see that again. Putin is not going to let him go. Second point. Now, people in the West think, the NATO thinks that Putin has become weaker and therefore Ukrainian army will be able to launch more aggressive counterattacks and the battle will swing in favor of Russia. I'm sorry, I don't subscribe to it. Putin is going to go stronger. Putin has said, right guys, I've been a little ease on you. I haven't used all my firepower. As Ambassador also said, he hasn't used his full potential of the Air Force. He hasn't used the full potential of his missile technology and of his artillery and many other weapon systems that he has got. He's only be using a small number. One artillery fire there, one MRSS fire there, one drone there, one. This is not how a concentration of force is applied when you want to achieve results in a tactical battle. You have to en masse use artillery fire. You have to en masse use the multi-barrel rocket launches. You have to support it with serious air effort. You have to support it with serious tank effort. All of that combined together makes an operation successful, which has not been done so far. It is not that the Russians don't know. It is not that the Russian army is not trained to do this, but it's just been restraining. And therefore, I see very soon a major escalation, while the Ukrainians will do what they want to do, and they'll continue to do these nibbling attacks as what they call as counter-attacks.
Okay, I don't doubt, sir, that there will be an escalation, but I'm surprised you believe that Putin has not given this war his all already. Because remember, here's a man who said this war would be over in 2 weeks, and here we are.
Yes, and
more than a year later, still talking about the war. Yes.
No, but that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
That the war should not have lasted more than 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It is
That's what Putin had said, and now it's lasted well over a year. And clearly, things haven't particularly gone Putin's way either.
Because he has not followed the principles of war.
He hasn't followed the principles of war. And in fact, Prigozhin had been bickering with the defense minister over the battle plans and the war tactics that were deployed by the Russian military in Ukraine. He had serious difference of opinion with the defense minister over that. But it's interesting you say that it wasn't just the fact that Prigozhin wanted to see the back of the defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. Perhaps a certain amount of fatigue had set in for his troops, and that may have also been a trigger for this mutiny. Wing Commander Praful Bakshi, come in here, sir. You know, there is no doubt that Putin has been humiliated by this mutiny, carried out by a man who was one of his closest ally till not too long ago, also known as Putin's chef. Not to mention, as Lieutenant General Shankar Prasad said, this is also, a huge intelligence failure. And KGB has a lot to answer for. But do you agree with those who say that Putin today is a significantly weakened and diminished leader who may have, at least for a little while, lost his grip on Russia? Or are we talking about a wounded tiger who is sure to strike back, and the only way Putin can do that right now is by doubling down on his offensive against Ukraine?
Thank you very much for giving me a chance. Let me tell you, ma'am, it's a fact is this, that Putin left a lot to be done by his commanders whom he trusted. You see, a head of the state does not go to the ops room and keep watching the battle plan every time. And he saw that his grade B, the forces which he had deployed, he thought probably the things would be over. That's a miscalculation on his part. There's no doubt about it. Failure of intelligence. But the execution of the operations were also at fault, which he realized after some grave mistakes were done. 24-kilometer long tank column left alone to burn the air attacks, etc. All those things we will not repeat. The question, as General Saab had brought out, yes, principle of war, selection and maintenance of aim, concentration of force, yes, they were ignored. But the question is, Putin then realized that he has made a lot of mistakes and a number of senior commanders have been sacked. There is also doubt. And now, as you use the word, the wounded tiger, yes, he's a wounded tiger, humiliated, all right, because the bad press has given him all the name. So that he'll sustain. Yes, health-wise, I also know he's down, but that health was earlier playing on him. And his political situation was weak before the whole war started 2 years back. So that also is there. But now Putin is going to get into a very serious operation. He is not going to let anybody get out, especially our Wagner Group leader, Prigozhin. Now, the Prigozhin will get shelter from Belarus for a number of time. Belarus is also a friend to Putin, also a friend to him. Yes, they will get it. But the question I must bring out, Prigozhin was angry on number of accounts. Their internal accounts was dealing with finances. I will not talk of that. But basically, when he said, I am fighting for Russia, though I am a mercenary, Incidentally, he is a very successful mercenary, and mercenaries came from 60s onwards. Colonel Mad Mike Hoare and all their names you must be knowing, in Africa, etc. He operated there. He was very successful. He said, if I have given so much to my motherland, at least I must get a recognition. Let me tell you, had he been caught, or the Wagner Group get caught in the war, they don't get a POW status. They're tried like criminals who was against the state in a civil court. That is what happens to the people who like mercenary. So now he said, I have done so much. When he found he will not even get that, and he will not get what he wanted, he fell afoul. They fell apart for various reasons, and I'm not. But he was, when he found that Putin has put him on the list of treachery against the nation, etc., that Putin had to take back because of Belarus. And that is why they said Slav blood is being shed. Same church, same religion, same language, the same DNA. How can you have, an entire Western world, especially NATO, watching and laughing all the way to the bank?
So you are saying that he was right when he said that he was retreating. He halted his march on Moscow because he indeed did not want to spill Russian blood, and that the point of this mutiny was not to overthrow Putin. It wasn't to have a coup, but to send out a message to the Russian military. I'm out of time. Lieutenant General Shankar Prasad, very quickly, sir. Putin has said, predictably, the West wants to see Russians kill each other. President Biden has issued a statement saying the US and NATO have absolutely nothing to do with what happened in Russia. This is an internal power struggle in the Russian system. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Of course. When they say it is an internal issue, but they're also watching it very closely, and they may have found that the situation is getting very favorable to them to intervene in manner other than the regular war and supplying weapons and equipment. After all, their intelligence agencies are also working. After all, they've been watching minute to minute what's happening in the Wagner army or the regular army and how the operations are progressing. This was an opportunity for them to take means other than interfering directly, maybe in terms of some lucrative money deals or whatever. Nobody can substantiate it, but this cannot be completely overruled either. So the situation is a possibility of a situation where other means could be used, and that possibility cannot be ruled out. Now, as far as Mr. Putin is concerned, I think the the Wagner army has no more future. He went back not for anything else, but knew that if he continues with this attack or whatever march toward Moscow, he will be completely ruined. Every single man will get killed.
He would have been crushed. There is no doubt about that. He would have been crushed. The 25,000 troops of the Wagner Group were up against Putin's 1 million troops. Wing Commander Praful Bakshi, I'm completely out of time. 30 seconds, sir. What do you think is going to be the biggest fallout of this mutiny for Russia and for Ukraine?
The biggest fallout of the mutiny is that, of course, there will be a lot of purges in the army. There will be a lot of purges there. The Wagner Group, Putin will do his level best to dissolve the Wagner Group, whichever way. Their lives will be spared. But I want to add one thing more. Ask the NATO world, are you ready to take Ukraine as NATO? No, they will not. Ask Ukraine. They are also very lukewarm about NATO anymore. So what they were actually fighting for actually is gone. They are now fighting for something else. Ukraine is helping Wagner Group, all right. They are accepting it because they want to have a long-term arrangement to strike Putin in case the things go wrong.
So have the goalposts moved since the beginning of this war? Many, of course, have pointed out, as the ambassador on the show did, that even Putin started this war without a clear vision of what he hoped to achieve from it. And this is a war he had said would end in 2 weeks. It is still on well over a year later. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Lieutenant General Shankar Prasad and Wing Commander Praful Bakshi. Pleasure talking to you. Thank you for your time and perspective. Of course, the question, what does this mutiny really mean for Putin? Where does it leave him? Will be a lingering one. Well, we're completely out of time. Thanks for watching.
ये 2 साल ऐसा है कि मतलब अगर अच्छा कर गए तो लाइफ आगे अच्छा है, नहीं तो फिर और स्ट्रगल करना पड़ेगा आगे जाके।
लड़का निकला घर से, सर पे जिम्मेदारी बहुत सी, ये कोचिंग वोचिंग जैसे लगे पूरी मौत सी।
लगता है ब्लैक एंड व्हाइट तो हो ही रहा है जिंदगी।
For me, my competition is excellence. I want to become a software engineer. I'll crack NEET and I'll be a doctor one day.
मुझे तो एक्टर बनना है, लेकिन इंजीनियरिंग कर रहे हैं क्योंकि मतलब सभी लोग कर रहे हैं।
People will compromise on buying clothes. They will postpone buying a house. They will not buy a car, but they'll definitely send their kid to the best coaching.
It's a lost childhood because coaching is now starting from grade 3, 4, 5, 6.
कितनी टेंशन्स दिमाग में है, कितना ओवरलोड है, घर वालों की गालियों का भी ना कोई तोड़ है। एंजाइटी से भरे मेरे जितने भी विचार हैं, कल एंट्रेंस टेस्ट है और आज से बुखार है।